Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional health using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Natha Campanella. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Narratives with me. Hi, it's Natha. It's a solo cast today, and we're going to be talking about Pisces. Pisces is a water sign, and it is a mutable water sign. So there are 3 water signs in the zodiac, and those are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. The water signs are very intuitive, and people with a lot of water in their chart are feelers. They experience emotions on a I don't want to say deeper. It's not to say that the other signs don't experience emotions by any means, but there's something about the water signs that the emotional response is stronger. So we're talking about things like compassion and empathy, and those things show up with all of the water signs. Pisces, I would say, is probably the most sensitive of the water signs, and that's because Pisces doesn't have any armor. Pisces has no protection. Cancer has a shell and pinchers, and Scorpio, of course, also has a shell and a stinger, but Pisces just has scales. And so people that have a lot of Pisces in their chart, they are going to feel a little bit more open, right? They're going to feel more open to feeling the things that other people are feeling, of feeling things that are in the collective. If everybody is stressed out and there's I always use the example of a sports, a sports arena. And, if the home team is winning, everyone's really amplified and excited, and you can feel your blood racing. And if your home team is losing, then everyone's mad and sad and grumpy and angry. And somebody with a lot of Pisces in their chart is going to be able to really feel those reactions in their own body. And as younger people, if you don't understand what's happening, you might feel unstable, right? Or you might take people's moods personally, or you might find that you just slip into a bad mood right along with everybody else who's in a bad mood. And there's a sense of losing power when that happens, because when you are porous and spongy and you're not paying attention, you're kind of open to whatever comes down the pipeline. So something with Pisces people is that it's really important to practice energetic hygiene, which can look many different ways, but it's about really learning to differentiate between your own experience and the experience of other people's, and knowing when they are merging. And this is a practice. Obviously, this isn't something that you snap your fingers and get, but I would encourage you, as you're listening to this episode, if you're really feeling like you can relate to some of what I'm saying, that you're probably very Piscean in nature. And if you don't know what your natal chart looks like, you can go on my website, nathacampanella.com, and you can download a free ebook that gives you instructions for finding your natal chart, and it gives many interpretations. And of course, it's, the interpretations are short and sweet. So I would suggest getting a professional reading if you really wanted to explore more depth and more nuance. But if you are listening and you're like hearing things and wondering, oh my God, why does this resonate with me? I would say that you probably have some significant Pisces or Neptune or 12th house action in your chart. So Like I just said, Pisces is connected to the 12th house. And the 12th house is where we go to be alone. It can represent things like asylums, things like institutions, prisons, but it can also represent things like ashrams and monasteries, right? Because what happens in the 12th house is that we seek out spiritual connection. And if we don't have a sense of spiritual connection, then we are feeling the opposite, which is disconnected. And both of those things show up when we're talking about Pisces in the 12th house. Pisces is so connected to the collective, right? It's the oneness. It's this idea that we are not just separate human beings living these lives where we're all separate. It's the idea that we are all quite connected, even if we can't see it, and even if we can't hold it in our hands. So where some of the signs, like some of the earth signs, get very black and white about what's right, what's wrong, what's reality, what's tangible, and the air signs get real scientific and intellectual. And I've known plenty of people who just refuse to believe that there's anything outside of what science can prove. And Pisces as a sign says, who cares? There's more than that. Pisces is about the urge to escape from limitations. And that is any limitation, whether it be a scientific limitation, a cultural limitation, or even a limitation of our body and our mind. Pisces wants to remove the illusion and reveal the truth. And so when we're talking about Pisces energy and we're in the middle of Pisces season, the veils are a little bit thinner. And we can't be quite as stable with our logic as we might like to be. So Pisces is ruled by Neptune. And some astrologers consider Jupiter to be the ruler of Pisces. And really, Jupiter was assigned rulership before Neptune was discovered. So you can look at both of those planets as a ruler of Pisces. I tend to favor Neptune myself. But Jupiter expands, right? Jupiter makes meaning. Jupiter wants to connect with things that are greater than self, and that certainly applies to Pisces. And Neptune, of course, is a planet that is about transcending and merging and oneness. With Pisces, we're looking at it like it's a connection to the divine. And I have Pisces moon in my chart. And so I just wanted to share a little bit about my experience with Pisces. And by the way, I talk a lot about Pisces and Neptune in an earlier episode of this podcast called Who Am I? It's another solo cast where I'm talking a lot about addiction. Because addiction is really related to Pisces. Because one of the things that happens is when we feel so strongly and so deeply and we're feeling other people's shit, well, guess what? It's really hard. And it hurts. And so then we want to get out and remove ourselves from those feelings. And that's what addiction is all about, right? It's this underlying sense that things are too intense. Things are too much and we're too overwhelmed and we can't deal. And I'm reading a chart and my client has shared with me that they've struggled with addiction in whatever form. I tend to look to what's happening in their water signs, particularly Pisces and Scorpio. And I look to see what's happening in their earth signs, particularly Capricorn and Virgo. Because when we're talking about the water signs, there's an openness. And there's a sense of feeling the emotions that other people around them don't want to feel. And there's just a straight up sensitivity and a sense of intuition. right? So we're opening up to things that we can't necessarily explain. And if we don't have parents or caretakers that can explain to us what's happening and say, oh, you're really sensitive. You don't have to take responsibility for this. You know, mom is mad. Mom is not mad at you. Mom is mad at her boss. And I still love you. And I think that even the best of parents aren't so good necessarily at validating the sensitivities of their children. Hopefully we're getting better. I really do hope that parenting people are becoming more and more aware and are able to validate that. But if you don't have that, then you are feeling everybody's stuff and you're thinking that it's your fault. And then of course, if you have the earth in your chart, then that brings in this element of wanting to be good and wanting to do it right and wanting to not make the people feel uncomfortable or mad or whatever it is that we would feel. And I know that was my experience, and that's still my experience sometimes. It's like I felt like if I made a boundary or I did something wrong and the person that I was with got upset, that it was my fault. And so my response to that was to be as perfect as possible and as happy and as, what does this person need? Because the Pisces can sense in and say, I know what's going on with this person. I know what they're feeling. I know what they need. And then the earth comes in and says, well, let's show up then. Let's do it perfectly. And so if you are relating to this sense of empathy, right? And a response of trying to be perfect so that you don't have to feel the uncomfortable emotions of the people around you, you might have a little bit of water in your chart, perhaps even Pisces. So something that's interesting about Pisces is it's really connected to the divine, right? It's connected to a relationship with spirit. And ultimately, that's where we want to end up. That's really the goal of Pisces and 12th house and Neptune. And if you think about the zodiac as a wheel, it begins with Aries. Aries is the infant. With Aries, we open our mouth and we demand. And then we get our needs met, like an infant. And we'll be talking more about Aries next month in my solo cast. But we move all the way around the zodiac through 12 signs, and we get to Pisces as the final sign. And Pisces is the psychic spiritual guide within us. Pisces is where we come into deep connection with spirit and with a spiritual practice. And it's where we use our compassion and our empathy to help and also to sense and to be. And we seek the truth. So it's a very interesting archetype, and it shows up in many ways. Like I said, obviously addiction. Check out that episode. Another way that it really shows up with a lot of us, and certainly with me, is in the idea of dissociation, of spacing out, of fantasy. So the stress response of Pisces is to swim away and get the hell out of there, which is why Pisces people under stress will oftentimes reach for drugs or alcohol or whatever, eating, shopping, sex. Another way is just by leaving, right? Your body's here, but your mind's gone. Like I mentioned earlier, it's like changing from one dimension to another. And it can make Pisces people seem really flaky and really spaced out. And I remember getting that feedback from my parents of like, Stop being, pay attention. Pay attention. I never really understood why I couldn't just pay attention all the time, because I have a lot of Capricorn in my chart too. And Capricorn says, I'm here, I'm paying attention, I'm doing what needs to be done. But then the other part of me is like, bye-bye, off in Never Never Land. So think about that as you're listening. How do you space out? How do you leave your situation, even when you're right here? I was in the store the other day and watched this dad who had 2 kids who were very rambunctious, and I did not envy him that. And he was standing there staring off into space, and his kids were jumping around, dad, 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 jumping on him, pulling on his arms and his clothing, and he was gone. So that tendency that we have to dissociate and just check out, that's Pisces. So something else that's interesting about Pisces is that it also represents like delusions, right? It represents illusions. So we can have our rose-colored glasses on when we're talking about Pisces, that tendency to oh no, it's all great. Everything's great. I don't want to see anything that's hard about this situation or this person. I'm only going to see the good. And we see a lot of spiritual bypassing, actually, that comes from the Pisces archetype. I'm just going to set out my crystals. I'm just going to positive focus. I'm just going to manifest it. And if we're not careful, we can slip into that, right? Because then we're talking about getting diluted. I remember I was part of a group for about a year, maybe 2 years, a year and a half. And it was one of those very positive focus groups where we were always talking about our wins, and we were supposed to be releasing everything that, all of our fears and all of our anger, just releasing it, right? And I remember thinking on one hand, oh, this is such a great idea. Who knew? Who knew that you could just positive focus yourself into anything? But I remember also being really skeptical. Wait a minute. I'd be talking to somebody, a friend of mine from the group, and I would be having a hard day. And they would basically start kind of nagging me to you just need to change your focus. You just need to expect the best. And I would feel guilty, oh God, that's right. It's my fault. It's my fault because all of these bad things are happening in my life, and it's my fault because I am not positively focusing. So we can get sucked into this group think when we start talking about Pisces, right? And imagine a school of fish. A school of fish is all moving at the same time with each other, doing the same thing. And in a way that can feel great because we're part of the group. And we're looking around and we're saying, this is normal, right? This is normal. But then when we get some distance, we can see from different perspectives that this is actually not normal, and that we don't actually have to fall in line and do everything that our proverbial leader is telling us. So we can look at cults, we can look at teams, we can look at groups, and we can see how we can get sucked in to this idea that we're one, we're part of the group, and we're kind of diluted. Because on the other side of that, we are wanting to merge, right? I mean, we are wanting to open ourselves up and become the less skeptical versions of ourselves, the less detail-oriented subjective. We're wanting to be objective. So these are some things to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about Pisces, is that we can go very unconscious when Pisces comes around. And we can sweep things under the rug. And when I'm reading a chart of a client and I'm looking at their 12th house, a lot of times the planets in the 12th house can represent things that their family of origin wasn't ever willing to talk about or address. And sometimes it can look like the things that will take this client many years to unearth and to actually look at and address. And so it's a complicated archetype, right? Because so many of us, what do we want? We want connection. We want to feel like we're connected to source energy, to the universe, to the divine, to other people, to ourselves. I mean, ultimately, that's what we want. We want to feel connected to ourselves. We want to know who we are. And Pisces offers all of that to us, but it's not necessarily easy because we can get tripped up. We can get tripped up by our addictions, by our refusal to see what's really happening, by our idealizations, even by the way that we imprison ourselves, the beliefs that we hold so closely that are our own undoing. The things that we're just simply unwilling to see and acknowledge. So if you think about this idea of like the hero's journey, Pisces is sort of like when you are right at the end, but you have to sort of get through the mists and the house of mirrors, and then you have to really get through the blocks that are in your own mind. So it's an interesting archetype. I think that if you were to think about some of the people in your life, that Pisces on the low end are, and by low, whatever, it's not a judgment. We're all constantly vacillating between the enlightened version of a sign and a planet and the dysfunctional side of it. So have no doubt, this is not about finally reaching enlightenment and staying there, or, the poor, pathetic souls that are down on the dark side. No, this is just when you've done less interpersonal work and you're not as self-reflective, then you're going to find that part of you, or those kinds of people are going to be the ones that are, sweet and fun, and they party and they're escapist, right? Maybe they're flaky. Maybe they're, malleable. And then as we do more introspective work and we really acknowledge the places that we get hung up on our own things, or that we, just don't want to feel shit, then we begin to move towards that side of Pisces that is more transcendent. Reflection, self-reflection brings us into a sense of oneness. It allows us to be compassionate with ourselves and with other people. It allows us to see where we are deceiving ourselves, right? Where we're even deceiving others. And it, sort of bolsters this sense of like transcending the ego into something that feels like a deeper spiritual connection. The advice for the Pisces part of you is to be very compassionate, right? And notice when you have come into a place of stress and you're trying to get out, what brought you there? What are the things that overwhelm your nervous system so much that you just have to dissociate? And knowing those things can be a real support because it can keep you, you can then kind of monitor so that you don't actually end up in a place that is that stressful. And it means that you can really notice it when you have accidentally gone into a stress place, a stress response. How can I support myself? Because with Pisces, there's such a strong component of empathy, really feeling what it feels like to have all of these emotions. But we can also go into a place where we just don't feel anything at all, where we're totally numb. And the numbness, both the numbness and the empathy, can get so intense for some of us that we're just kind of frozen, don't know where to go. So, something else about Pisces is so creative, right? It's that part of ourselves that if we can tap into the invisible realms, we can actually pull out some of our most creative things, right? So we're not just limited to what's in our own head. We can connect with, you know, guides or fairies or angels or, you know, people that have passed on. Like, it doesn't really matter. We can pull things out of the ethers and use them to help us become, sort of fulfill on our destiny, fulfill on our visionary sense. Because Pisces is the final frontier in the zodiac. And we want to transcend that, proverbial ego. I don't think egos are something that need to be, crushed or stomped on or whatever. There are a lot of schools of thought that look at the ego like it's the worst of the worst, and I certainly don't hold that belief. I think the ego just helps us organize the parts of ourselves so that we can be a human. But there's something that is very limiting about the ego, because the ego is very connected to those details. I was born in Colorado. I'm a female. This is my name. This is my eye color. This is what I like. This is what I don't like. So it's useful as an organizing system, but it's fairly bland. The information's fairly bland. Whereas with Pisces, the information is so rich. And if you've ever had these flashes of joy, of just feeling like you are held by the universe and all is well and all is good and you can trust, this is that what we're always sort of seeking in enlightenment is that the sense of being able to just see that it's all okay. It's all always been okay, and it all always will be okay, regardless of the physical circumstances. Not so easy to get there, though, is it? But we can get there for moments at a time. And I think that's the thing about Pisces, is that we probably only get there for moments at a time in our lives. But the more introspective we can be, the more we can really trust our intuition, our gut instincts, more that we're really aware of our pain, right? Aware of our thoughts and our avoidances, and also of the things that really fill us up with joy. The closer we can get, we can have more Pisces moments in our life. and more connection to spirit or true nature or whatever it is that you call it for yourself. All right, I think that's it. I'm sure I'll stop recording and come up with a million other things to say, but for now, that's it. If you have questions, please find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Natha Campanella Astrology. You can get on my newsletter. But certainly, if you find me on Instagram, feel free to send me direct messages with your questions or your Piscean experiences. All right, bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to work with me privately or read more about all of the numerous ways to work with me, visit my website, nathacampanella.com. I really appreciate any time that you take to leave a review of this podcast on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps other people to find it. And of course, if you enjoy this podcast, share it widely and freely with those that you know and love. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.